I was 41 years old, holding a cooling cup in my hand, and absolutely convinced that I already knew every single bit of what I was capable of feeling. Then she stopped on the sidewalk, and I realized I knew nothing. It wasn't love at first sight. It was worse. It was recognition. Before that night, I slept well. I woke up feeling weightless. I lived without emptiness. After she sat on my porch for 40 minutes, I was never the same again, and the scariest part? She didn't even touch me. If you've ever felt that a simple conversation changed something inside you without asking permission, stay with me. Subscribe to the Another Flame channel right now, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from right now? It was a Monday in October, one of those days when the Portland sky turns zinc-colored and the air smells of wet leaves and cold asphalt. I was on the back porch with a cup of tea that no longer warmed anything, observing the street as one observes one's own past without hurry, without a destination, just the heavy silence of an empty house after a long day. I was 41 years old at that moment. 41 years old, and the quiet, almost numb certainty that my life had a defined form. Work, routine, the cat that slept on the sofa, the calls every Friday with my sister in Atlanta. I had built a peace that worked. Small, perhaps, but mine. The street was almost empty. A car passed by every now and then. The trees on the sidewalk had turned orange that week, and I kept looking at them as if they were a sign of something I couldn't yet read. That's when I saw her. Diana has lived 3 houses down for 2 years. We waved, exchanged the occasional hey on the mailbox, smiled from a distance with that specific cordiality that Americans master so well, warm enough not to be cold, but without commitment. She is 45 years old, with dark hair streaked with silver that she doesn't hide, a posture that always seems slightly preoccupied with something internal. I knew very little about her. Her name, her profession as a professor at some college nearby, the fact that she had a beige dog that she took for a walk every morning. That night, she didn't have the dog. She walked slowly along the sidewalk, her hands in the pockets of her moss green plaid coat, and I don't know what made me get up from my chair and say something. It was automatic, almost involuntary. "Too beautiful a night to spend walking alone," I said. She stopped. She looked at me with that expression of someone caught off guard but not regretting it. And then she smiled, not the polite smile from the mailbox. A different smile. Slower. As if she had decided something right there and then. "Do you have another chair there?" she asked. I went to get it. When I returned, she had already climbed the steps to the balcony and was looking at the sky as if she knew exactly where she was going. I placed the chair next to mine. We sat down. Silence came before any words, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar, that kind of silence you feel with people you knew in another life or who should have entered years sooner. I didn't understand where that feeling came from. I just knew I didn't want it to go away. And then she said, "I needed a balcony tonight." There was something in the way she held the cup I'd offered her, 2 thumbs embracing the ceramic as if she needed the warmth. Something in the way she paused before answering, not out of hesitation, but by choice. As if each word was weighed before being spoken. I didn't know many people like that. Most people speak to fill space. Diana spoke to say something. The light from the balcony cast shadows on her profile. Her slightly aquiline nose, her firm chin, the fine lines near her eyes, that someone less observant might call marks of time, but which I saw as a map, as a story written on her face. I wanted to read every line. I stopped listening to what she was saying for a full second, just because I looked at the way she was gesturing while she spoke, her hands moving slowly, deliberately, like someone who once learned to dance and never forgot the rhythm. "Did you hear me?" she asked, and there was humor in her voice, without judgment. "Sorry," I said, and felt a heat rise in my face. I was thinking about something else. A caramel-colored leaf landed on the balcony railing between her chair and mine. Neither of them removed it. Diana turned to face me and said, "How long have you lived here?" "I didn't know you wanted to be called." I said. She looked at me for a while. Too long a second to be polite, too short to be anything I could be sure of. Perhaps I didn't know either, she said finally. And then he looked away towards the sky. And I stood there thinking, what exactly just happened here? There's something I've never told anyone, and now I'm going to tell you. I knew that night that something was happening inside me. I knew it the way you know when the weather is about to change, not by the clock, not by the news, but by the air. By the smell. By some sense that has no name but works before any logic. But I didn't let that knowledge reach the surface. I sat in my chair with my cup, my manners, and my well-organized 41-year life, and treated it like neighborhood gossip. Because it was safer that way. Because I also knew that if I confronted what I was feeling, I wouldn't be able to pretend I didn't feel it. Diana was telling me about a book she was reading. A novel. Something about women in Alaska in the 1940s. And she described the characters with that kind of quiet enthusiasm some people have, not the boisterous excitement of someone trying to impress, but the quiet intensity of someone who is truly immersed in what they're recounting. I could hear her voice. Its medium timbre, slightly husky. The way she elongated certain syllables when something mattered most. And I felt it in my chest, not in my heart, literally in the center of my chest like a gentle pressure. Like someone placing their palm there and letting the warmth slowly penetrate. I took a deep breath involuntarily. She stopped mid-sentence. Are you okay? With the attention my whole body seemed to be directing towards it without me asking for it. It was as if my skin was awake in a way it usually wasn't. Aware of the space between us, about 70 centimeters perhaps. The chairs at an open angle, as if that space were a living thing. I hadn't felt this way in a long time. I wasn't sure if I'd ever felt exactly like this before. Diana finished her thought about the book and stared out at the street with that expression of someone who is in two places at once, present, but with something hidden. I wanted to ask what it was. I wanted to ask so many things. Instead, I asked if she wanted more tea. She said yes. And as I went inside to get the kettle, I caught myself glancing quickly at myself in the hallway mirror, not quite understanding what I was looking for and yet knowing exactly what it was. I came back with the kettle and, under the pretext that I was perfectly fine, "Thank you. Everything was normal. It's just a neighbor on my balcony." I poured her tea first. She tilted her head slightly as I approached, not to receive the cup, but in a small, almost imperceptible gesture, as if she were paying attention to me in the same way I was paying attention to her. I noticed it. I remembered it. The conversation slipped into more personal territory without either of us planning it. She was the one who went there first. "How long have you been living alone?" she asked, and there was something genuine in the question, not intrusion, but real interest. 3 years, I said, before I had someone. Pause. It didn't work out. Do you understand the difference? She shifted in her chair, perhaps to warm herself, perhaps just instinctively, and her arm touched mine. Just for a second. Coat against coat. The most neutral, most accidental contact there is, but I felt it. I felt that same pressure from my arm to the center of my chest, only now more defined. Like a musical note that you recognize before you even know which song it's from. She didn't move away immediately. She stayed there, her shoulders slightly tilted towards me, as if the angle was more comfortable that way. And I didn't move away either. "Do you miss her?" she asked, and I wasn't sure if she was asking about the person who left or something else entirely. "Sometimes I miss the idea," I said. The version of life I thought I was going to have. But lately, I continued, without really knowing why I was saying this, I've been missing things I haven't even had yet. The kind of thing that, when it's happening, seems to have its own time separate from the clock, separate from logic, as if the whole world decided to pause just so you could properly experience it. Diana was looking at me. Not a polite glance. Not a neighborly look. She was looking at me with an attention I felt on my skin, literally, like when the sun emerges from behind a cloud and you only notice the warmth because it's there. "Things you haven't had yet," she repeated, and her voice was almost a thought spoken aloud. Yes, I said, and for some reason my heart raced. She took a deep breath. Slowly. I watched her chest rise and fall. I saw the mist of cold air as she exhaled. And there was something about that seemingly ordinary gesture breathing that felt like the most intimate thing I'd witnessed in a long time. There's something strange about this stage of life, she said. You think you know yourself completely. You think the surprises are over. And then something small happens and you realize you knew almost nothing about yourself. I don't know any other way to explain it. But it was as if the atmosphere around our chairs had changed temperature, not colder. Not hotter, just different. Heavy. My hand was resting on my knee. Hers was on the arm of the chair, about 20 centimeters from mine. I was aware of those 20 centimeters in a way that nothing else was at that moment. Not the tea. Not the street. Not the wind. Me too, I said. And I wasn't talking about that phase of life. She knew. I knew that she knew. And neither of us said anything more for a while, long enough for those words to settle in the air as something permanent. When she finally spoke, it was about her dog, who had been sick last week but was better now. And I nodded and asked his name as if the previous conversation hadn't happened. But it did. And we knew it. There's a particular cruelty in being too present in a moment you can't hold on to. We remained seated. The conversation returned to safe things, winter arriving early this year, a neighbor down the street who was pregnant, the never-ending construction on the corner. Words that filled the space without compromising anyone. I spoke and listened and responded, and while doing all this, a whole part of me was stuck on that "it's happening," she had mentioned. Present. She had said, present. Diana crossed her legs, adjusted herself in her chair, and for a moment stared into space ahead with an expression I couldn't quite make out. There was something there between concentration and resignation. Like someone who understood a difficult calculation and didn't like the result. I wanted to ask her what she was thinking. I didn't ask. I wanted to say, I'm feeling this too. I mean, really, without metaphor, without a shield. I wanted to say, I don't know what to do with what I'm feeling, but I know I'm feeling it, and that in itself is more than I expected from this night. I didn't say. We remained like that, the two of us carrying something similar without exchanging a single word about it, and there was a strange intimacy in that shared silence. As if the fact that we were silent about the same thing made us accomplices in something that didn't yet have a name. The cat from the neighboring house crossed the sidewalk down below. A distant siren passed by and disappeared. The wind stirred the caramel leaf that remained on the railing, but it didn't fall. Are you going to stay here for long? She asked suddenly. It took me a second to understand that it was about the house. I don't know, I said. Sometimes it seems small. Sometimes it seems exactly right. She looked at me then, and there was something in that look that wasn't a question, wasn't an answer, it was simply her. As if for a second, all the layers had disappeared and what remained was just Diana looking at me from an honest and vulnerable place that she probably didn't show to many people. I felt something open up in my chest. It wasn't pain, it wasn't joy. It was that thing that lies in between the two, recognition. The feeling of seeing and being seen at the same time. And then she smiled, slightly, almost shyly, and looked away towards the sky. And I thought, if she leaves now, I don't know what I'm going to do with all this. The moment arrived as most important moments do. Without warning, in the wrong way, at the most inconvenient time possible. Diana had picked up her phone to check a message, something from work. She explained, sorry. And while she stared at the screen with that expression of someone deciding whether to ignore it or not, I stood there watching her profile in the dim light of the balcony and thinking, say something. Say anything true before this window closes. Because I could feel the window closing. Not dramatically. Just that specific feeling when a moment starts to slip away, when the tide of what could be said begins to recede into the ocean of things that will never be said. I knew that feeling all too well. I had let many moments slip away in my life. She put the phone down. She looked at me. Sorry, she said again. No need, I said, and then we opened our mouths at the same time. There's something and for a second there was that nervous laugh you get when two people realize they were thinking the same thing, only this time the laugh didn't reach its end. It stopped halfway. It hung in the air. You can speak, she said, and her voice was different, lower, more direct. My heart was in my throat. I opened my mouth, and her phone rang. Not the silent vibration of a message, the full, irritating, unavoidable ring of a phone call. She looked at the screen. I saw something change in her face, a subtle tightening of her expression, the kind of reaction people have when they see a name that carries weight. I need to answer, she said. And there was a genuine apology in her voice, not a polite one, but the kind that stings a little when you say it. Sure, I said. She stood up, descended the porch steps, and took a few paces back with the phone to her ear. I could hear the tone of her voice, but not the words. Something serious. Something that demanded attention. I sat there with the empty cup in my hand, that unfinished sentence swirling inside me. I want to tell you that. She returned with her shoulders slightly slumped. I need to go, she said, and it seemed like it was costly to say it. All right, I said, and my voice came out calmer than I actually was. She stood at the foot of the stairs for a moment, looking at me. The thing you were going to say, she began. You can wait, I said. She nodded slowly, as if she knew she couldn't. Good night, she said. Good evening, Diana. I know exactly how many because I counted. Not obsessively or maybe a little, but the way you count when something is weighing you down and time seems to stand still. I woke up on Tuesday with that feeling of something unfinished that sticks in your throat like a word you've forgotten. Wednesday was worse. On Thursday, I convinced myself that I had exaggerated everything, that it was just talk, that I had placed weight where there was none. On Friday, she knocked on my door. I opened the door, and for a second, I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, and she didn't say anything for a second either. She just looked at me. And in that entire second, I knew I hadn't exaggerated anything. May I come in? She asked. Yes, I said, and walked away. She went inside, stood in the hallway, looked around as if she were seeing the house for the first time, which in a way she was. I closed the door. We stood about 2 meters apart. There was no chair, no cup, no porch, and no empty street between us. It was just the house, the light from the hallway, and the thing that had been left unfinished. I was wondering, she said, what you were going to say. Wait, she said, and there was a contained urgency in her voice, like someone who had rehearsed but was still afraid of losing their train of thought. I need to speak first because if you speak, I won't be able to finish. I've learned things about my feelings that my marriage never allowed me to feel. Pause. Including my feelings about women. That night, before the phone call, in a way that would be useful, and she respected that with that quiet dignity that I had already learned to recognize as part of her, she said she would give me space. She said there was no rush. She said what people say when they know that forcing things won't work, but that letting go also hurts. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for how long, I don't know. The problem wasn't what she had said. The problem was what I had felt when she said it. Because it wasn't surprise. It wasn't shock. It was that terrible and wonderful feeling of recognition, again as if a part of me knew it before I did, and had been waiting for someone to make it real out loud. I went to the kitchen. I made tea that I didn't drink. I tried to read and read the same sentence 8 times. I put on music and turned it off after 3 minutes because each song seemed to talk about something I wasn't ready to hear. At night, lying in the dark, I kept my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the most random things. The way she held the cup with her thumbs, the smile that slowly appeared. The 20 centimeters between our hands that Monday night on the balcony. I thought about how much of my adult life I had spent in a kind of mild emotional anesthesia. Not suffering, not exactly. Just absent from myself. Building a functional routine around an empty center that I had learned not to look directly at. And then a 45-year-old woman stopped on the sidewalk in front of my house. And after 40 minutes of conversation, I was lying in the dark at 2 a.m. being confronted for the first time in years with the simplest and most impossible question of all. What do I want? Not what is safe. Not what makes sense. Not what will cause the least possible friction with the life I have built. What I truly want. I turned to my side. I hugged the pillow. The cat climbed onto the bed and settled at my feet with its charming indifference. I stayed like that until dawn. No response. But, for the first time in a long time, without dodging the question, I didn't see her for a week. Not exactly a choice, or perhaps yes, a bit of both. I would leave earlier, return when it was already dark, avoid the balcony in the early evening with a conscience I pretended not to have. I knew she lived 3 houses down. I knew that eventually the small world of a quiet neighborhood would place us in the same space. I just didn't know when. On Wednesday, I went to the corner market at 6 p.m, my usual time, my usual route, without thinking. I was in the tea aisle, which is a specific and ridiculous thing to remember when I heard her voice. Not for me. For someone on the phone at the entrance of the store, laughing about something with that low laugh I already knew. My whole body froze. I held the tea box without putting it in the cart, without letting go, without doing anything. I stayed like that for about 3 seconds that seemed much longer, listening to that laughter without being able to move, feeling something in my chest that was simultaneously heat and panic and something that had no name but that I was tired of pretending I didn't feel. She went into the store when she hung up the phone. He saw me before I had time to do anything. The laughter faded. It didn't turn into a closed expression, it turned into something else. Quieter. More present. She stood in the doorway for a second, looking at me from across the aisle with that market-like distance between us, and there was so much in that look that I could barely hold it. But I stood my ground. She walked slowly towards me. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. And the silence that followed was filled with everything that had gone unsaid all week. "How are you?" she asked, and the question was simple. But the way she asked it wasn't. There was real attention there. A specific concern that wasn't that of a neighbor, but of someone who cared about what the answer would be. "I've been thinking a lot," I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in days. She nodded. Slowly. "Me too," she said. We stood there in the tea aisle, our carts slightly in each other's path, the world of the supermarket continuing around us as if nothing were happening. And I thought, here it is again. That window, slightly open. "Diana," I said. She looked at me. "Would you have time on Saturday?" I asked. She took a deep breath, and she smiled slowly, as always. "Yes," she said. Saturday arrived with a light rain and a leaden sky. One of those days in Portland that feels like a license to stay indoors and be honest. She arrived at 3 p.m. with a bottle of red wine and the expression of someone who had decided something before even ringing the doorbell. I opened the door and let her in and didn't say, "I'm so glad you came," because it seemed too obvious. And I didn't say, "I'm nervous," because that seemed too obvious either. We opened the wine. We sat in the living room. The rain pattered against the window with that particular sound typical of late October. "I need to tell you something," I began. "Go ahead," she said, and I heard the echo of the previous week in that phrase, the same generosity, the same space she was opening up. I spent my whole life thinking I knew perfectly well what I felt and what I didn't feel. I stopped. I constructed a very clean narrative about who I was. And it was a true narrative. It wasn't a lie, but it was incomplete. And I knew it was incomplete, and I never wanted to look at the missing part because I searched for the word. Because it was easier. I looked at her. But it was real. and I was scared. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. This strange clarity that I was exactly where I needed to be. That caramel leaf on the balcony railing stayed there for 3 days after that night, and every time I passed by, I looked at it as a sign I couldn't yet read. That the tea that got cold that Monday got cold because I was paying too much attention to something else. That your whole life can change in a 40-minute stretch on an old wooden balcony in Portland in October. And you won't know it's changed until weeks later when you're lying there at night and realize you're smiling for no apparent reason. Her hand in mine on that rainy Saturday was the simplest thing that happened between us, and it was the most important. There was no kiss that day. There was no cinematic declaration. There were 2 women sitting on a sofa with the rain outside, fingers intertwined, and a conversation that lasted for hours about her marriage, about the relationship that didn't work out for me, about the versions of ourselves we had left behind thinking they were losses, when perhaps they were the opposite, perhaps they were liberations. She stayed until 10 o'clock at night. When he left, he stood at the door for a moment, his coat already on, the rain outside lighter but still present. "Next week?" she asked. "Next week," I said. She smiled, that smile, the real one, the one that came slowly and lingered a second longer. And so it was. I closed the door. I leaned against it for a moment. My heart was calm in a way that was new, not the calm of someone who feels nothing, but the calm of someone who feels too much and has stopped being afraid of it. I went to the front window and looked out at the street. I saw her walking in the drizzle, her moss green coat, her posture always slightly preoccupied with something internal. When she reached her house, she turned her face not completely, just enough, and I don't know if she knew I was at the window or if it was instinct. But it turned around, and then I understood. What began on that balcony wasn't an accident. It was a recognition. 2 people who had parts of themselves hidden in dark places coming close enough for the light of one to reach the other. I was 41 years old. I thought I already knew every feeling I was capable of. I thought that discoveries about myself had an expiration date. Diana taught me that's not true. That the heart has no expiration date. That desire can arrive in the form of a neighbor stopping on the sidewalk on a Monday in October, in a conversation that begins with comments about the weather and ends up changing the way you understand yourself. Sometimes the thing you needed most was exactly that. Someone to sit beside you in the darkness and make the silence seem habitable. Sometimes that's it. Sometimes that's all there is to it. If this story touched something you hold inside, leave a like now. Subscribe to the Another Flame channel right now. Every story here is made for you to feel seen, understood, whole. See you in the next one. But before you go in the next video, I'll tell the story of a woman who loved someone in silence for years, believing she would never be loved in return. Until the day she discovered that the silence was mutual. You won't be able to pause it. Keep an eye out.